Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of After Wednesday. I am your host, Jeffrey Hayes. So glad to be back with you. It's February already. I love it. Groundhog Day. It's happened. Valentine's Day. It's coming up. We're all scrambling. It's cold. We need chocolates. God knows what else. If you're watching the show tonight on Google Plus, as always, I have enabled the Q&A app. You should see, hopefully, on the right side of your screen. And again, if you're watching on Google Plus, you should see something on the right-hand side of your screen that says, you can click a little box maybe that says Ask a Question. If you have a question for my guest tonight, who I'll get to just momentarily, please feel free to do so as we're conversing this evening. If you're watching us on YouTube or perhaps in an embedded player that on Twitter or on Facebook, I'm not quite sure how that works. I think you can click a link or something, but maybe that'll work. I initially wanted to explain, because I had a question earlier this week from a previous show about why I wasn't taking questions on Twitter anymore with the hashtag stuff. It's just that I'm a one-man show, so it's kind of hard sometimes to coordinate, and I want to give my guests the full attention they deserve. So maybe I'll work out something soon when I have some more time. But for right now, Q&A is enabled if you're watching us and interacting with us specifically through Google+. But you may be watching on all those other platforms I mentioned, so that's okay too. So my guest tonight, I'm so thrilled he is taking time out of his schedule. And trust me, he's on a very serious schedule with some undertaking we're going to talk about soon. But my guest tonight is Charles Forsman. How are you doing tonight, Charles?
Good. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Thank you so much for being here, and I don't want to waste any time. I'm going to jump right into it with some questions I have for you.
All right.
I was reading up on your bios and your background, and you attended and graduated from the Center for Cartoon Studies. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now, I've had a couple of other guests on the show that attended there, and we've talked about it a little bit, and I'm kind of curious about sort of what pointed you toward going to something like the Center for Cartoon Studies, which is a very unique institution. What sort of pointed you toward going there rather than just being a self-trained artist, cartoonist / comic book artist and writer?
Well, for me it was a combination of wanting to go to school. I had a strong disinterest in school. I ended up dropping out of high school, and then I didn't do any college or anything for a bunch of years, and I don't know, when I hit my early 20s, I was like, you know what, this is tough doing all this stuff on my own. I want to go to school and learn stuff. So, and then that got me into, I started at community college, and around the same time, I fell back in love with comics, and I had never had the drive to really do it myself. I used to tell myself that I had that drive, but I never really was able to find my way through that. And then, it was about the same time that the Center for Cartoon Studies started, and I applied, and somehow I got in. I think I got in by the skin of my teeth, because I hadn't really, the first comic I really finished was for my application. And yeah, it's sort of, and it just, and I had just come to a point in my life where I made the decision that I really, really wanted to give this a shot. Cartooning, that is. And it just seemed like, that given the opportunity that they accepted me, it was just like, all right, and it was good, because it was like, I was giving it's sort of a big gift to give yourself. It's like you're gonna study nothing but comics for 2 years, and I was, I don't know, I was just really, I had made the decision, that's what I wanted to do, and it was a really good place to do that, and just really, really focus. And it's great. I think it distills. CCS is great. For me, it was like distilling years of experience down into 2 years.
How do you now? It's interesting you say cartoon. What's for people, and also for myself, what's that distinguishing between cartoonist and comic book artist?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if there is one. Yeah, I guess I don't know. That's just what I call a cartoonist.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's just what I consider it doing. I think, especially, it's just what I think that we're doing. Like to me, it's distilling. Like being a cartoonist to me is about distilling information down into easily like understood pictures and words. Distilling life down, if I can be pretentious sounding.
So did you?
Yeah, I mean it's I guess comic book artist is I know what you're getting at. Like I feel like someone drawing Superman probably doesn't call themselves a cartoonist, but to me it's the same thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know.
Now, when you said you really committed to really your first actual comic book was your submission to to CCS, and it's my understanding that they make you do something really specific. It's like you have a robot, an apple, um,
Yeah, I think
something along those lines.
yeah, it was like a robot. I think mine was a robot, a banana, and I can't remember something else. But yeah, everyone has to do like I forget what it is, like a certain number of pages with these elements in it. And I think it's just to see if you have, if you can actually pull something off, and um, you have some sort of drive, which is probably a good idea. If you're gonna go to school for something like this, you should
Did you-
probably pass a little test first.
right, right. And do you remember how long it took you to make that?
No, I have. God, that was a while ago. I know
Yeah.
my mom helped me a lot. She helped me with the formatting.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, she's a graphic designer, so she helped me figure out how to print it out in the right order and fold it and staple it and all that. My
So
mom
she,
helped me with my first mini comic.
so you grew up then in a household with someone with a design aesthetic, as she was a graphic designer. What did you see around the house when you were young?
Well, she actually, I mean, she always had been creative, but she was a homemaker for most of my. Are you still there?
Yes, yes.
Sorry, my cat's walking on the keyboard. No, she was a homemaker, but when I was like 15 or 16, she went back to school to become a graphic designer. And she was always creative. She was always making clothes and building stuff. And my dad, he was really he would sell antiques a lot, like at the flea market, and we always. I think my first exposure, like we had to comics and art, were like we had Maxfield Parrish paintings, well, prints all around the house. Do you know Maxfield Parrish?
I do not. Who is Maxfield Parrish?
He was an artist in the I think the early 20th century. I think he lived in Vermont actually, and just did these really beautiful landscapes with usually nude ladies in them. But also, my dad happened to have these books of Frank Frazetta paintings.
Oh, okay. Yes, yes.
Those really blew my mind when I saw those. Because I guess he was selling prints of those too. Yeah, and peanuts. I mean, my parents got the Sunday paper, so.
Well, I
Peanuts
think that
was
was all
fun.
of us. Yeah. I'm kind of bummed out these days by the thought of I think they still do like reruns, I guess is what, what we can call them, in the dailies and the Sundays. But yeah, and that was very much an essential part of my growing up was the Peanuts and the Sunday Funnies, and even in the dailies.
Yeah, yeah, they're great. I mean, it's sad looking at the pages nowadays because every time I see one, I don't know what they're doing. They're distorting the art
Mhm.
because they keep shrinking like the number of pages. Like
Yeah,
now it's just one spread. It seems like on the
yeah.
Sunday paper, and they're distorting the artwork to squish it all down. It's really weird. Like I don't know why the syndicates aren't like yelling at them. You can't squish Charlie Brown's head. It's got to be
No.
a circle. It's not an oval.
Yeah, it's strange how I think back. Did you ever read Bloom County or Outland or
No, I know of them. For some reason I never got into what's his name?
Burt Breathed?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I never got into those. I don't know. I was more of a Garfield guy, I guess.
More of a Garfield guy. Have you seen that Boom Studios is doing this weird series with Garfield now, where everybody's getting a shot at it? It's like called the 30 Lives of Garfield or something. This week they got one coming out where Roger Langridge is doing.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Oh, cool.
really kooky.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
Um, now, many of your works, as I first, let me say, I first came to you through The End of the Fucking World. I saw it. I was down in Tallahassee a couple years ago going to see a concert,
Mm-hmm.
and my fiance, my then fiance, my now wife at the time, who humors me in every city we go to by going, yes, let's go find a comic book shop. We were driving around and I found this shop, and there I saw it sitting there, the Fantagraphics edition of it, which was up here on your website with the black cover.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it there, and I was immediately just drawn to it just by the cover alone, and I started flipping through it, and I said, my goodness, what is this? This is something striking. And as I've read that, and I've read Celebrated Summer, many of your works seem to focus upon the experiences of adolescence. And as I read those, including, by the way, I really loved Witchzard. I can barely say it. As I read those, I got to thinking about what does this really remind me of, sort of in a way tonally, and it was John Hughes films.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and how you both sort of deal so well with and deal honestly with the miasma that can come with growing up.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're you take a very much more violent and dark turn in the End of the Fucking World. Not so much in Celebrated Summer, although there is a little bit of it, but you're more you're dealing with it is more. I guess I hate saying dark. I'm sorry. I don't want to just use that.
No. It's that's fine.
I guess I would say more realistic in the sense that you're sort of tapping into something with there. But what is it about adolescence that you feel just that? And this again comes from me when I'm reading it. What is it about adolescence that you feel sort of compelled to focus upon it in so much of your work?
I think I keep going back to it in my work. I never planned out to, like, I'm gonna do, like, it's not like I didn't sit down and was like, I'm gonna do stories about teens and growing up and stuff. Like, that's just I just seem to keep going back to that when I write. I think for me it was just for me and a lot of people, being a teenager was a very painful and confusing time, and
Right.
And I think I'm it's probably some sort of, I don't want to say therapy, but it's about, it's like I keep revisiting it, and I keep looking at it in different ways, especially as I get older, and I think it's just, I guess I always consider my comics as the way I make sense of everything and organize my thoughts, and and this is the stuff that's coming out, and I just keep going back to that time in my life, especially with Celebrated Summer. It's almost autobiographical. It's that day pretty much happened to me. Not exactly the same, but yeah, it's just I don't know if it's I don't know if I'm looking for an answer, but I just find it to be that time in your life. I think it's such a strange combination of things. You're hopeful, but super pessimistic at the same time, and cynical. And for me, I was like bursting at the seams because I was sick of being stuck in this little town, and I wanted to like see what life was about. So you're like bored, but you're like excited to get out of it, and there's a lot of frustration. So it's and it's a lot. I feel like I had to grow up pretty fast. I think the reason those years were tough for me is because I lost my dad to cancer when I was 11 years old. So I went from being pretty innocent to like learning about things like death, with someone really close to you. learning about that at a pretty young age and having to, deal with something that big at such a young age, I think it immediately turned on my self-reflection, and all of a sudden I was aware of myself and my place in the world. So yeah, I know I'm feeling a little jumbly, but this is like, it's just an area that I seem to keep going back and forth, or back to. Yeah, and I've, a lot of people seem to be connected to this work, to these things that I've done. So I think it's hitting some note that, I get a lot of letters from people who are like, oh man, you are, whatever feeling I'm creating, it's connecting with them, and they're having those feelings too. So, yeah, I hope that was a good answer for you.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. It was, and two, I grew up in a small town in Alabama, and I guess that's too the feeling I get, especially for the end of the fucking world. It's the feeling of what you just like. I don't know, that connecting with his anger.
Yeah.
About nothing seems right. It's all very confusing, and you're trying to, your body's going through such metabolic changes, and your brain's going through changes, and you're trying to funnel experience, and all of these experiences, it seems like at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And what I thought was really interesting about the end of the fucking world was that you created a male protagonist that was, for most purposes, was pretty much devoid of feeling. It seemed like it was his quest to achieve feeling.
Yeah.
And was that something you struggled with developing him along the way, or did you have a pretty good idea about that?
Yeah, the story started, and a lot of my stories start sort of in a off the cuff sort of way, whether it's like free writing or it's and the same thing with the end of the fucking world. That first chapter just sort of came out of me, that the character, like I did it really quickly. I did it in about a week, and it just, this character just sort of, I just had this feeling about him, but yeah, so he's like, he's basically a sociopath, and he's trying to interface with this world and be normal, but yeah, you're right. He's like, he can't really feel the things that he knows other people feel, and I think it would have been really tough if I didn't have his girlfriend there, because as I went to do the second chapter, I was like, oh man, what am I gonna keep it going with just inside this guy's head? Yeah. So what I did is I alternated every chapter. I went back and forth between him and his girlfriend, and so that you could sort of see a different side of the events that are happening, and give it a little more of a relatable slant.
With Celebrated Summer, and really the end of the fucking world also, they're both sort of, I would classify them as these adolescent sort of buddy road trip stories, but with two very different trajectories.
Yeah.
And I would also categorize them. I say that they're very patient stories of trying to feel through experience, even if it requires or results in sort of fear and or pain. And especially in Celebrated Summer, you present this type of story through an LSD experience, and that's something I've personally experienced. Again, growing up in a small town and bored, we did drugs. That was. So I freely admit that to anybody. I was just like, really, smoke dope? I'm like, smoke dope? I don't know what smoke dope. That's like starter. Come on.
Yeah.
But I find it particularly interesting. The way you present hallucinogenic moments are more about highlighting sensory experience. And how long or difficult was it to sort of lay out those types of moments?
It wasn't that difficult because I remember them like yesterday. No, yeah, I mean that's true. Yeah, for me, like being, oh man, like that day happened to me, and for me, it wasn't like I didn't want the book to be like when you say, oh, it's a book about kids who take LSD and go on a drive to the beach. That I'm sure that conjures up something in everyone's head. Like oh, it's going to be filled with crazy drawings and crazy hallucinations. Which
Right.
there's some hallucinations in it, but for my experience with that drug is that it wasn't great. Like it wasn't insane. It wasn't like a movie. It was everything was very subtle, and it was all
Mhm.
about with me and my friends. It was very we would get pretty introspective, and we would start seeing patterns and everything.
Right.
Start seeing circles. For me, it was all about seeing circles. Like there's a lot of circles in the book, and it was and it's just it opens up your brain in a weird sort of way. You feel sort of childlike, and like the for me it was really as simple like as and it also like time slows down, which
Yes.
also like just being I feel like when I was a teenager, time was moved much more slower than it does to me now, and
Mm-hmm.
um, things like the one character is staring at a bush and watching kind of grow and bloom in front of him,
Right.
um,
And that's a really sublime moment too. Like and that's the thing where you were just talking about you talk about quiet moments where like the instance with the rock or the instance with the plant or what we have up on the screen from what Fantagraphics provides people as an example. He's staring at the mirror,
yeah,
and I mean you do these beats in between, especially in this particular page and in this panel sequence, where you're talking about time slows down,
yeah,
and it really gives you that sense of it. And I think in the best way. Like what I like about Celebrated Summer too is that it's not lauding drug use and it's not damning it either. It's just is,
yeah,
and I think that that's a really difficult thing for people to pull off sometimes.
yeah. I definitely didn't want it to be about like a book about drugs. That's not what the story was to me. It was more about sort of getting across this actual feeling that and this time that I experienced when I was 16 or 17, however old I was.
Are both characters sort of part of you or sharing aspects of that, or did you identify more one with the other?
Yeah, I'm definitely Wolf, the main character, and Mike is sort of an amalgamation of two of my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah. Wolf is sort of how yeah. I think for a long time that's how I like the way he looks is how I felt on the inside. how I kind of thought I looked in a certain sort of way. I don't know.
And I've read as I've been reading your work for a while and sort of reviewing it and going back and reading other people, they point out, I don't know, people are very quick to say he draws like demented Peanuts-esque characters, and
Yeah.
I don't think that's very fair or even really nice, to be honest with you. Where I kind of go, well, I mean, it's just it's a style. Like I don't. How do you? Did you?
I mean, coming out of CCS, I really got inspired by old comic strips,
Yeah.
especially Seagar was a big one for me.
Oh yeah.
Greater Popeye.
Yeah.
Like that was like his line and the way his characters were sort of round. That was a big thing for me, and also Gasoline Alley, that was
Mm-hmm.
a big one, and of course Peanuts, and I feel like there's one more, but I don't know, and also like the extent and sort of the people that have extended from that sort of cartooning. People like nowadays, like Sammy Harcum and Chester Brown were big influences on me. I fell in love with this, the way they just you can get so much out of it. The characters look very simply drawn, but man, they're expressing mountains of emotion. That
absolutely, yeah.
For a long time, that's sort of like I fell in love with that idea, and that's sort of like how it came out.
What is it about the 9 to 12 panel page that is so appealing for you?
Oh yeah, well yeah, Celebrated Summer is a lot of that. Boy, I don't know. I think that's probably another influence from like looking at old Sunday comic strips.
Mm-hmm.
Because they would have this big, beautiful page with so much room to work in, and I just really like the idea of that each page was sort of its own thought on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm telling, it's like a 60-page story or whatever. I think what I was sort of thinking was that each page could sort of stand on its own,
mm-hmm.
and that even taken out of context, it would have a thought or a feeling that would come across, and you wouldn't necessarily need the whole thing. But when it's all added up, it creates an even bigger and more complicated feeling in the reader, I think.
What influenced you? Like one of the major sort of visual thematics in something like The End of the Fucking World is what I call the black panel with writing, with either thought or dialogue of some sort. That's a very conscious decision to tell the story in that way. And how did you come to that decision?
I think I'm trying to think. I know I stole that. I saw people doing that, and I know one of the examples is probably James Sturm, who started the Center for Cartoon Studies. I think, and I don't think he used it quite the same way I did, but I remember seeing panels in his work that were just black with lettering in it. And I think even another CCSer, Sam Gaskin, I think he did this mini comic Sugar Cube, which is still one of my favorite comics ever. I think he did that. He had panels with just writing in it, and to me it made a lot of sense. Like it was just, to me it made you, I think it made you slow down the reading even more, and it made you really reckon and think about what was being said. And I just like that. Like I like, obviously you can tell my work. I like slowing the reader down and getting those quiet moments across, and for whatever, and it also worked because I indicated whose thoughts you were reading, whether the word panel was black or white, so you knew there was a change going on without me being super overt about it, as to whose thoughts you were privy to. It's funny, I haven't done it since then. I haven't done it in a while, but yeah, I don't know, just something about it works. I think it's playing with the time and the pacing.
My guest tonight is Charles Forsman. We're talking about his earlier work right now. If you have a question, you're watching us on Google+, please feel free to ask. The Q&A app is enabled. If you're watching us from an embedded location or over on my YouTube page, there should be something there to click on to allow you to ask a question. We're talking about how you pace your stories, and where did you get your narrative sense from? Was it more literary, or was it more strictly comics based when you were growing up, or a nice combination?
Comic books and movies. I love reading, but I haven't read enough in my life. I've often wondered if I have some sort of reading, there's something where it's really, I'm a very slow reader when it comes to just text on a page, which I think frustrates me, and it seems like it gets worse as I get older, unfortunately. But But yeah, I think, I grew up with an older brother who was two older brothers. One introduced me to comics, and the other one introduced me to movies. And he's a filmmaker today, and he was showing me. I felt like I had a film school upbringing because he was older and he was showing me things that I probably should have been watching, and I got exposed to a lot of different types of movies. Which was super invaluable. I think I think movies is really the thing that really maybe I got sort of my some of that stuff from. Maybe I learned somehow just watching so many damn movies. And of course comics. I mean I started reading comics when I was 10. I think reading when Jim Lee's X-Men #1 happened, and then all the Image comics. I was reading all those, and eventually I started reading the Max, and then that got me into Peter Baggs' Hate, and then I had a friend who showed me 8-Ball. Yeah. And, yeah, it's yeah. I guess that's sort of my early education, I think.
Are you excited about the 8-Ball reprint?
Oh, yeah, I am. I'm hoping I can, since they're my publisher, I can and get a cheap copy.
All right, Fantagraphics, I'm calling you out. Please send Charles Forsman a copy of the complete 8-Ball, or you, Daniel Klaus, if you're listening. Make it happen. Come on, the man loves you. You influence him. Make it happen. What? So
Thanks.
Yeah, I try, man. One of your brothers is a filmmaker, and you say what were some of the films that were so influential early on?
Let's see. Well, oh boy. Well, he showed me things like I saw Boys in the Hood when it came out, which came out in '92. So I was about 10 or 11, and I probably shouldn't have been seeing that. My mom wouldn't have been happy, but I remember seeing that like a billion times. And the usual stuff like like Indiana Jones and all the Spielberg stuff and Star Wars. And then he, like when Bottle Rocket came out, was Anderson's first movie. I was lucky enough to have a brother who was super savvy, and I saw that, right when it came out. None of my friends knew what this stuff was, but I just fell in love with it. Yeah, it was. I felt really lucky that I was. It felt like I was in my own little movie club, because everyone else was just wanting to go see the Mortal Kombat movie, and I was
right. And you're sitting there like Bottle Rocket.
Yeah. Like, you guys got to see Bottle Rocket.
Yeah, the weird thing about Bottle Rocket though is that as Anderson's first film, and I remember we got a copy of it on VHS because in the middle of Alabama, a movie like that, the only way it was going to reach you was Blockbuster. And maybe they had one copy, maybe.
Yeah.
And I remember watching it and being like, what is this? But I think it's weird because it's the one film that seems to be out of place in his visual.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Like he didn't have the funding yet to do what he eventually does in the brilliance that it is, but that movie's brilliant in its own way.
Yeah, and it's still, in many ways, it's my favorite one. It's between that and Rushmore. I think that's pretty common in filmmakers. I tend to like when directors are at odds against money, maybe, and when they have less freedom to do what they want. I think that leads to more interesting choices and workarounds.
What type of films does your brother make?
He does like really personal sort of Terrence Malick crossed with Michael Mann sort of stuff. And like he did one movie that was like all about relationships and very poetic and very beautiful scenes. And then his last one was like a drug action thriller. Actually, like very Michael Mann inspired.
Okay.
Yeah, he's great. He's very talented. And he's an editor. He like works as an editor too. He does a lot of DVD extras. I think he still does that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's amazingly talented.
At the end of last year, you wrote this amazingly straightforward blog post essay
Yeah.
about where you were really, and I've got your main website up right now, and people can, when they go there, they can look at it at charlesforsman.com and click on my year in review. About where you were both professionally, really, and personally. And I remember reading it out loud to my wife, and we were both very moved by your honesty
Oh wow.
in it. And have you discovered more things through journaling to be helpful or sort of therapeutic for you artistically, or was that just a critical moment in time for you, and that just had to happen? Like, this had to come out at that time. Like, that was.
Yeah. No, I don't write a lot. I don't write down my thoughts quite often, even though I probably should. 'Cause it is very helpful to organize it out on the page. But no, that was sort of a, it was, if you guys go read it, it was, it was kind of a rough year creatively and mentally for me. So, at the end of the year, I found myself coming out of it, and I had this urge to put it down. It seemed. I mean, I was nervous about it because I didn't want it to come across as like, oh, look at this, my crappy year, now buy my new comic book, I didn't want it to be like, to have it come off like, oh, this guy's just trying to drum up excitement for his new comic book. But I told friends that I had written this thing, and they were like, you know what, I really want to read that. Please, can you put it up? And that's sort of like, I used to have a blog years ago that I would write periodically, but blogs, as they've sort of fallen out of fashion, I stopped doing that. Like, many people are reading it anymore. So yeah, I don't know, it just sort of, it for me, it personally put a nice cap on the year that I had. And it was like drawing a personal line in the sand. It was like, I've feeling a lot more confident recently, and it was sort of like, not putting it behind me, but acknowledging, that I might have learned a lesson here, and and now I'm gonna move on, and I'm gonna, with my new scars, I'm gonna keep going. I'm not giving up. As every other day I consider giving up on comics, and questioning why I'm doing this and what I'm doing. So, but yeah, it was a happy ending, and I'm glad I put it out there because I got a lot of feedback. I think it ultimately, having it help people, having other people, I know when I was having a tough time reading something that would have been amazing.
Well, and
everyone likes to not feel, everyone likes to know that they're not alone, and
Absolutely, and that's something, that's why my wife and I were very moved by it. She is she works with young people, who are in desperate situations sometimes, and we talk about it often, about how it's the small things, it's just knowing that you're not alone in your struggle, like you just were mentioning, and I think that speaks a lot to your work in that connection with adolescence, that you're going back to working on something that's sort of primal and universal for us all, right? Because that is the time where you most question and shake fists at the world and go, Jesus Christ, won't somebody just understand me, and feel, you just want to feel.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's tough for me because it's so easy to feel alone because I'm a pretty quiet guy. I don't often, I don't feel like I'm very confident in my voice, so it's I'm scared a lot to talk, and I don't do it a lot, so I don't get the chance to a lot. So yeah, so I understand how easy it is to get in your head and not leave, and and sort of feel like no one else is having these feelings, even though they are.
And
Yeah.
you say that that this posting this and other people reading it and other people connecting with you gives you this sort of new confidence at the end of last year and sort of segueing into this year, which also sort of segues into Revenger. And Revenger 1 really reads to me as an extension of your own confidence through tackling a very popular genre and also trying to attack with sort of a different style than what we had seen previously from you, and a different type of story and everything about it. This first issue just really pops, and you have, of course, mentioned recently in other interviews that you got, and also in your essay, you sort of mentioned that you got inspired by people like Michel Fife's work on Copra, and what has the process of planning to attempt a consistent self-published monthly that you're not used to sort of working in genre-wise?
Yeah.
What's that been like so far? Like, are you just sort of, did you lay it out a little bit beforehand, or what's been that process?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, because it took me pretty much a full year to get that first issue out of myself. But I mean, but there was a lot of throwing out pages and starting over and rewriting and getting it to something that I felt like that would work, and that I was happy with. Like one of the big things is, like, a previous version of Revenger, the scope of the story was much larger.
Mm-hmm.
And, I found myself thinking way too much about, like, building the world that she's in.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, too many, like, politics I was thinking about and stuff, and I wasn't thinking about characters. And actually, it was speaking of movies, it was a movie that sort of, I actually had finished colored like the first issue, a completely different version, mind you. And I guess it was in December, or January, and then, I was feeling okay about it. I was waiting a few days to see how I was feeling about it, and then I watched this movie, The Guest. I don't know if you've seen that movie.
I have, yes.
Oh, good. And not that it's like, I mean, it's an action movie that has a lot of things I love in it. But just seeing that, that night, it was like, okay, I knew I had to throw everything out again. Because I knew I wasn't getting the feeling that, like, the whole reason I started to do an action comic book, I knew that I had failed in a certain sense. And I wanted, like, that movie just reminded me of the feeling I had been imagining when I first started thinking about doing a book like this.
Mm-hmm.
So the next day I woke up and started redrawing the whole thing, rewriting it, and changed everything. I made the scope a lot smaller, and I don't, and it's, I like, earlier I said how I work improvisationally, and I still do that to a certain extent. To me, that's the fun part of comics. And I think I did The End of the Fucking World, I did that monthly, even though it's on a much smaller scale. It was 8 pages a month, just black and white, and I was working very quickly. That I fell in love with serializing comics by doing that for 16 issues, however long that was. That sort of, like, I had never considered doing serialization because, all through school, when I was in school, everything was about the graphic novel. Like, everyone was, like, excited about, New York publisher book deals, and you had to do, 300-page books, and of course, like in alternative comics, we saw what happened in the market. They got pushed out. There were no 24-page alternative comics, in comic book shops anymore. Which is a thing I loved. So just accidentally putting myself on a serialization path with The End of the Fucking World taught me that I love that. I love telling things chapter by chapter and showing it to people. I'm not a big fan of sitting sitting in my room for 2 years working on something. Going crazy. I love short comic books. So yeah. I mean, I should say I'm not going to be as hard-assed as Michelle Fife is. I'm giving myself 4 to 6 weeks. That's sort of my to get an issue done. And it's tough at the beginning because especially with the money, it's expensive to print these things. So I have to work a lot on pushing each issue to raise the money to be able to print it.
Now, do you use the digital platform to raise that money for the print, or is that something separate?
Yeah, So I had the book the first issue up immediately digitally.
Right.
And it was also, but you could order a print copy as well, pre-order it. So yeah, that was the way I raised money. And I raised enough money, thankfully. I did have a friend. I didn't end up really needing it technically, but he sent me the print cost. I have a friend I grew up with who was like one of my best friends, and he ended up moving to San Francisco like when we were in like freshman in high school. But somehow he's managed to turn himself from pretty much poverty to a millionaire. He's like he buys everything I do, and he's like, how much do you need for the print run? I'm like, man, don't do that, But he sent me some money, so that I knew I could at least print this first issue, and I'm gonna pay him back. So that was really amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah. How do you feel then about? I'm curious because this has kind of crept up lately, and I'm a little bit confused about it, and maybe you know someone who's might be doing this, but I'm also pulling up for everybody right now where you can go digitally to order Revenger on charlesforsman.com, so please do. You actually have it in 3 different ways. You can go to Gumroad, you can go to Comixology, and through Google Play also. Yeah. This patron website I've been seeing this, like I don't know, like I'm kind of confused about it. I don't I don't know how quite I feel about it,
I like it. My partner Melissa Mendy, she's a great cartoonist. She actually started one, and I think it's really great.
Okay.
I mean, I know I definitely we have those thoughts too. We fight with ourselves because what's sort of what's it's tough because it's like you're I know. Oh God, this is such a weird thing.
I'm sorry. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
Oh no. I have trouble like voicing my opinion on these sort of because it's like it's tough when you're because I'm sympathetic to both sides of the argument. Because I'm an artist who has no money, so I understand how tough it is to raise money.
Yeah.
And to be able to keep doing your work, without stopping to do other stuff.
It's not that I have a problem with patronage, because I mean patronage is as old as the arts. I mean, it's how people forget that's how Shakespeare paid the bills for quite some time.
Yeah, of course.
And I guess I'm just in this Kickstarter kind of world where we've been sort of overdone with it almost. It seems like everybody's pushing some sort of what I mean, and I sit back and
it's the Kickstarter fatigue is the thing.
Kickstarter fatigue, yes, that's an excellent way of putting it.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that. Especially it seems like it's quieted down a bit lately, but it seemed like there for a couple of years, every week there's a new comics Kickstarter thing happening. And I think I like when Patreon came along. It seemed like a better option to me than Kickstarter, because Kickstarter always felt like you were raising money for just this one thing. It gets weird because like when something gets hype, it's it raises like hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's like, does this thing actually deserve this, attention?
Right.
Or is it just like people are excited and, it's like the weird hive mind. People just go where the excitement is.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a weird thing, and I think publishers are very valuable. They're gatekeepers, but I think gatekeepers can be a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
But I'm also a huge believer in self-publishing. I love publishing my own comics and having the control over everything.
Right, and I want to speak to that too.
Yeah.
I want to talk about you, of course. I'm going to pull it up on the screen here in just a second. You founded, you run, you curate your own place, Oily Comics. How early did you know that then about having your own imprint was going to serve you best, rather than working for a publisher exclusively, or even a company exclusively, maybe as a creator-owned project, or even as a freelance?
Yeah, well, that's when you go to CCS, the big focus there is on. It's different from other comic programs like Savannah or the Joe Kubert School. Like those are they're more like trade schools where you're pretty much just focusing on the storytelling and maybe being a penciler or an inker or whatever. But at CCS it's more about the whole thing. Like you're thinking about the design and how the comic's gonna look. Every assignment you have to hand in a finished comic book. You're not just hanging up pages on a wall. I mean, sometimes you are, but most of the the big assignments you're making a mini comic essentially. That's the big focus there. So I came out of there like really, I fell in love with the idea of making my own comics and doing everything and printing at home and folding and stapling, and so that's sort of so that's where I'm coming out of. And Oily is just an extension of that. When I started The End of the Fucking World as these little dollar pamphlets, and people started to pay attention to it, it just made me. That's sort of how Oily started. Then I just started asking my friends. It was like, hey, I'm doing comics this way. Do you guys want to do something similar? And I'll handle the printing, and I'll give you like a little slice of it if I sell some.
Sure.
And and it's just I've slowed Oily down a bit just because Revenger is my new focus right now. But yeah, Oily was an amazing thing that I did pretty gung ho for about 2 years straight. Where at its height I was releasing 5 mini comics a month, and I had around 200 to 300 subscribers at any given time. That would get 5 comic books in the mail every month. It was insane.
You did a subscription service in 6-month intervals or 4-month intervals? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, it was like you could get like 3 or 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that was nuts. I kind of burned myself out a little bit.
I want to say too that as much as I'm a print enthusiast, I really enjoyed reading your comics digitally.
Oh, good.
And I wanted to ask you, do you have to put a lot of thought about now how you design a story like Revenger for digital viewing through something like a digital guided reader like we have on Comixology, or these things that creep up? And I was showing my some people at work celebrated summer through guided view on my iPhone 6, and they were just like, it was perfect. Like every panel fit perfectly.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it was such, and everybody, it actually sold people not only on the guided reviewer, but of course on your comic as well. They were just like, oh wow, it's one panel at a time. You know what I mean? Like it's very specific. So how do you are you starting to think a little bit more about that, or has that not come up in your mind yet?
The guided, not really. I don't think about guided view so much, just because I mean, I think it's pretty awesome that people can read comics on their phone. Well, let me say, digitally, Revenger is sort of a product of me falling in love with reading digitally.
Okay.
Because I always I never thought I would be into it because I always hated reading comics online or like on the computer or my laptop.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But then I got a Nexus 10 used a few years ago, and that changed my whole view because then I started buying books off Comixology, and I was like, oh, I get it now. Once tablets came out and it was in your hand and you could lay in bed and read, and that just taking up the whole screen, then I was like, okay, this is awesome. So Revenger is sort of a product of me wanting to do a digital comic book. And it's also like, oh, it's the freedom of full color. You don't have to worry about, even though I am worrying about printing a full color comic book now, but
sure.
But I love it. Like it's how I read a lot of comics now digitally, and it's sort of sacrilege to a lot of my friends. Because I come from where my friends they're all about the object. They want the book, and I still have that too. But I also like not having books everywhere.
It does save on space.
Not but I still love books to death. They're irreplaceable. But I do enjoy. I love and like I said before, my love of short comics and periodicals. I think it's a great transition to reading on a tablet or a phone. And so as far as I think Guide of View is cool. I never personally use it. But I mean when I do it's I guess I do when the text is too small, but I think it works pretty great. I think it's awesome. Personally, I think people say this that it's maybe opening up to new audiences, and I hope to a certain extent that's true because that's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's my hope with having a digital comic is that people are more willing to give it a shot because of course you can sell it so much cheaper. It's a small commitment. You don't have to ship anything, and it's right there. So if they're in the mood to try something new that second, they can try it that second.
You mentioned, and I'm gonna this will be my last question because we're almost out of time. But you mentioned that digital, it's right there, and when you go to your website and you purchase any of the comics, it gives a suggested price. It says 2+ or 3+ or what have you. And I'm curious because of the popularity of Panel Syndicate. With Brian K. Vaughan, and then there was stories about how of course people were not giving anything. Which I find really odious. I'm just like, at least give them a damn dollar. Are you finding a little bit of success with the model that you're proposing at least?
I am. I'm surprised every time an order comes in. I would say, I don't have the graph in front of me, but I feel like at least 40% of the time people are throwing me an extra $1 or $2 when they order. Which I find just amazing, and it's great, I know I would do that if my favorite artists were offering something, pay what you want. In a sense, I would do that definitely. Especially if I want to support them. I feel like it extends to like Patreon. It's like someone you really want to support, and it's damn hard to make money making comic books. So, especially at such a small level that I'm at, it's like. Every little bit helps, and for people that really want to support their favorite folks, I think it's every little option helps.
Well, I'll say this Charles Forsman, that I don't think you're going to be very small for very long, based on what I'm reading and what I'm seeing, and as people are growing and your popularity continues to grow with everyone that I talk to and share your work with. I want to thank you so much for being here tonight. Can you hang out 1 second while I wrap things up?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. Feel free to share the show via Google+, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. As at the end of every show every week, this show instantly archives onto my YouTube page, where you can find all the episodes of After Wednesday and all the interviews I've done and or will do. So you can check that out at your leisure. If you want to contact me on Twitter, you can find me at JLDPROD2002. If you want to follow and catch up with Charles Forsman on Twitter, you can get him at Charles Forsman. Also, the multiple websites we showed this evening in his self-publishing, you can go to Fantagraphics. If you go to Comixology, he has his own page with multiple things available anytime for you. I highly recommend them. I highly recommend Revenger 1. For God's sakes, read it. It's fantastic. I can't wait. I'm pins and needles for number 2, which is why I'm letting him go now, because I know he's got a schedule and he's working on these things. So, I want to thank him again. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for listening. We're back in 2 weeks with Ryan Ferrier will be on the show. So please look for those postings, or you can just subscribe to the YouTube page, and it will just pop up when you need it. But anyway, thank you all so much. And until next time, everybody be safe.